Episode 1. I Don't Want You to Be Happy. It was 10 p.m., and the moonlight was dazzling. Room 101 on the top floor of Hotel Waverick, Seattle was pitch black, and there was the faint sound of breathing. Natalie Davidson opened her eyes, but the world before her was so muddled that she couldn't see clearly. Her body felt strange, as if it had caught fire and she was burning alive. Someone seemed to be lying on top of her, pressing down. But no matter how much she struggled to push him away, he remained motionless. Her mind was a mess, and she couldn't think straight. She only vaguely remembered that the previous night she had welcomed her fiancé back from his travels abroad. And then, because she was so happy and drunk, she had been brought to her stepsister's room to rest. She hadn't expected to find this when she woke up. "Who are you?" Natalie's voice was cut off by a heavy gasp from the man, and his grip on her body got tighter and tighter. She didn't have the strength to push him away. "Let me go." She had never felt like this before. A wave of lust washed over her, and she could not help but respond to him. Her body was exceptionally hot, and she frowned. Something wasn't right. The feeling of lust faded, and she suddenly felt terrified. But she couldn't stop the man. As he pushed into her, she felt herself losing consciousness until finally she couldn't stay awake any longer and passed out. Outside, the sky was dark. Around 3 a.m, the cell phone on the bedside table vibrated violently. With a frown, the man woke up from his sleep. His gaze slid across the messy bed sheets and then over to Natalie, who was covered only by a thin blanket. His expression immediately darkened. He picked up the phone and slammed it down. The hostility in his eyes was clear. These people had actually dared to drug him. They must have gotten tired of living. Steadily, he got up, threw back the covers, and went to take a shower in the bathroom. Afterward, without a trace of hesitation, he turned and left the room, as if the person on the bed was just an object he didn't need to pay attention to. When Natalie woke up, it was morning. The moment she opened her eyes, she felt pain. She had a splitting headache, and her entire body was extremely sore, as if it had been beaten. She sat motionless at the head of the bed. The events of the previous night flashed through her mind like a movie, making her tremble with despair. The man who had assaulted her was obviously not her fiancé, Nick. How could she have lost her virginity under such strange circumstances? What should she do? What on earth should she do? She hurriedly picked up her clothes from the floor and put them on. She wanted to go home quickly and wash up. She couldn't bear to stay in this room, even for a second longer. But the moment she opened the door, she saw Nick, who was standing outside with a shocked face, alongside her stepsister, Cheryl, and her father, Tom, who both looked furious. "Nick?" Natalie didn't know how to explain and barely got a grip on her thoughts before she was slapped in the face by her father. The mess in the room had not been cleaned up, and the evidence of what had happened there was obvious.
"Look at what you've done. You've cheated on your fiancé. You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed the whole family. How could I have raised a daughter like you?"
Nick gripped Tom's hand tightly and frowned as he looked at her face.
"Natalie, how could you do this?"
No. She shook her head with all her might, trying to clasp his hand, afraid that he would leave. "I was drunk last night. I only came back to the room to rest." She suddenly looked at Cheryl, who was standing in front of her with wide eyes. "You did this, didn't you? You are the one who brought me back to the hotel last night, to this room. Why did you do this to me?" When Cheryl heard this, she looked wrong. "I don't understand what you're saying. I did no such thing." "You didn't?" Natalie growled as her anger reached its peak. "Then how did I end up in someone else's room? Why would that man..." "Enough!" Nick interrupted her with a loud shout, as if he didn't want to hear anymore.
"You want to blame someone else for what you've done?"
He looked at her coldly.
"I only left for 6 months, and you're already this desperate. Did you really have to climb into someone else's bed?"
Natalie hugged her arm in panic as tears rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the carpet. She couldn't believe Nick was saying these things. They had been together for 3 years and were about to get married. "Nick," she said in a low voice, practically begging as she looked at the resolute man in front of her. "Please, believe me."
"Don't say any more. Just listening to you disgusts me."
With a look of pure disdain, he turned around and strode off down the corridor.
"The engagement's off. I don't want to see you again."
His words were like a sharp knife stabbing straight into her heart. Despair slowly spread through her and was on the verge of spilling out. It was so painful that she could no longer breathe. "Nick!" She staggered after him, but her father grabbed her by the arm and shoved her to the floor.
"Natalie, you're no longer a part of this family. From this day on, you're not my daughter."
She was stunned. After they left, her head was in shambles. She didn't even know how she made it home. But by the time she did, her belongings were already packed and left by the door. Tom had even booked a plane ticket for her, and he told her to pick up her stuff and leave the country immediately. "Natalie, are you all right?" She was in a daze as she lowered her head to pick up her things. Cheryl walked down the steps at a leisurely pace. When Natalie ignored her, she didn't get angry. Instead, she laughed. "Do you really want to know how you ended up in that room? Let me tell you. You were right. I put you there. I did it because I want to marry Nick. And I can't stand the thought of you being happy with him."